Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. For those of you out there who have wanted to embark on a particular goal, let's just say that you're approaching a midlife and you think to yourself, well, I no longer want to work for other people, but I'd like to go into business for myself. So you take one step at a time and you open up your own shop and you start serving people in the way you feel best fit, and you find yourself running into snags sometimes. And then all of a sudden you realize that you're plateauing, but you can't seem to figure out what it is that's keeping you from getting to that next level, whatever your goals could be. Perhaps you've run into the world that most of us experience known as ambiguity and expectation. But what if you could get some clarity that could help you find out what those roadblocks are? Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is psychologist and Fortune 500 leadership expert, Dr. Britt Polson. He is an executive trainer and author who teaches managers, executive-level personnel at professional development workshops for Fortune 500 companies such as General Electric, Xerox, Blue Cross Blue Shield, and Microsoft. His background in psychodynamics and group psychology provided him with a unique perspective that enables him to professionals improve their relationships and workplace dynamics and careers. And most importantly, he may help you get a kick start on how you can have more clarity as you move to that next level. His book is The Clarity Compass, and I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Dr. Britt Polson. Dr. Polson, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate it. I enjoyed your intro. I like how you set that up. Have you ever started a company and moving into career and plateauing? I wrote that word down. I like that word, plateauing.
Yeah, and it's interesting because a lot of us actually feel that way. We go out there, and I've seen this a lot, especially in America, as I started my own business more than 13 years ago, is you begin to realize that the hardest part about developing a business or taking things to that next level usually starts with us, but we tend to think it's the outside world that's blocking us, and we try to solve what's outside of us rather than taking a look within, and that's what your book is all about.
I was just thinking that is the nugget. That's the nugget. Whether it's a career piece or an interpersonal piece, we think that we've done all we can because we're living in our own reality maps, is what I call them, and we've done everything we can within those reality maps. Therefore, if something's going to change in my career or even in this interpersonal relationship, it must be you. It must be something else on the outside that needs changed. And so I'm trying to bring the awareness back into ourselves to say, how can we shift our reality maps? What blind spots do we have that we can start playing with that actually change up the situation?
Now, I've been blessed doing this program here, as I said earlier, for at least more than a dozen years, and I've been in broadcasting now for more than 15 years. And I've had the opportunity to sit across the desk from people such as Anthony Robbins, Herb K. I mean, you just name a whole lot of people in the personal development arena. Here's what I'm going to say. For our listeners out there, I've read a lot of this stuff over the years. I ate, slept, and breathed it. This here was actually one of the best books that I have read with such simplicity as far as how you carry out what a lot of these leaders talk about. In other words, your message is pretty simple, but yet it takes work. Yeah.
Well, thank you. First of all, I just went to see Anthony Robbins just last week, so I think highly of him. And to put us in the same sentence, I take as a compliment. And so thank you for that. And also just that I went through about 5 different editors, each one trying to help it get more and more simple. The first one I wrote was more like my dissertation, and so it's really gratifying to hear you acknowledge that it's simple, but it still takes a lot of work. And I think that's the key, and the work is mainly in looking at myself, just as you've been pointing out. And the book is guiding you through how you can look at yourself. But in the end, I still have to be willing to see things in ways that I might not readily want to see them.
Now, Dr. Polson, just so I can be clear about this, you've been doing this now. We're going on almost 40 years now. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, I started working for Dale Carnegie courses in '83, but I was even doing work with Og Mandino books and things before that. So it's been It's about 40 years, yeah.
That's interesting you bring up Og Mandino. I remember back in the 1980s as I decided to embark, I was kind of one of those many people that get really frustrated with where you're at in life. You're working for other people and you think you want to strike out and find your own way. And I think I started with a small little network marketing company selling life insurance is basically what the product was. But I was excited about it because it was something different. And certainly when you get involved with network marketing companies, the first thing they really hammer away at is personal development, because you've got to learn a whole new skill set of things other than being an employee that really matter out there in the world, and most of that work has to do with you personally developing yourself.
Yeah, especially in internal resilience. When you get all those no's, and no, and no, and no, there's a resilience.
Is there something wrong with me?
Believe me, I sold books. Actually, that was interesting you say that, because I sold books door to door in 1980 it was. And that's actually when I was first exposed to the Og Mandino books, kind of my foray into transformation. And I believe me, I had those moments where it's like, like you just said, something's wrong with me. Nobody's saying yes. And I just remember collapsing even one day on the side of the road. It's like, I can't do this anymore.
No doubt about that. You know what's interesting, too, is most of that self-help, now I'm thinking this is what a lot of people, let's say in the first year or 2 years, whether it's you decided to go in the direction of a network marketing company or really build your own business, is that, and this is just my insight about this, people are looking for a way to avoid pain. Because as you said, you're out there selling something door to door, whatever the case is, and you're getting no's. That's painful. How do I find that magic bullet out there? And I'll read stacks and stacks of books. I'll stay in the self-help section at Powell's in Portland, Oregon, until the sun rises for a second time in a single day. Find me a way out of the pain. But the only way out of the pain is to go into the pain and find out why is it there in the first place. And that's what the Clarity Compass really begins to point out about how you can go about doing that.
Actually, thank you. Because I'm appreciating the depth of your program here, Daniel, because the truth is that the Clarity Compass is a tool that it's an analytical tool. It's a cerebral cognitive tool that helps you analyze your life and introduce you to your own blind spots and where your reality maps may be challenged. But also, as you use it, it's really a method of long-term transformation. And that's why actually I got excited in prepping for your program, because it's Beyond 50, and my PhD is in Jungian psychology. So Jung really, and Joseph Campbell talks about the kind of second half of life, or last third of life, being more of a transformational piece where I'm not just trying to go through the pain to make a sale, but I'm actually going through that pain or going through that growth spurt emotionally for the sake of wisdom, for the sake of depth and richness. And since your listeners are a lot of them beyond 50, I was thinking that I haven't really shared this on radio before, but to me, ultimately, the book, it delivers in spades. If you got a career problem, you got a relationship problem, if you work it, it will definitely help and make a huge difference in that situation. But what I haven't really shared on the radio before is the depth that it invites you to move from the cerebral into the heart. It invites you to deeper into soul or spirit or the emotions, deeper sides of yourself that Jung talks about is the primary goal in this second half of life. So I just, given the depth that you've got, I just feel invited to share that level of the work as well.
Well, absolutely. We want to give people some meat, but we're not going to give them the rest, because they need to get out there and they need to get this and they need to roll their sleeves up and get to work. Now, what I like about how you laid this out is that you use two people as an example. One of them is a business owner by the name of Deck, and then the other one is somebody who's looking to get that senior partnership in a law firm, and they both start out pretty much with the same mindset that the reason they're not getting what they want or getting to where they feel they deserve to be is because they're looking at the outside world as the problem. And the Clarity Compass helps them to discover a lot more about what's going on. So now let's first of all talk about what the clarity compass is.
Okay, so it's two polarities at the surface level, which, again, trying to keep it simple like you talked about. So at the surface level, it's just two polarities. A north and south polarity, which is moving from intentions to action. It's like it's deepening, why am I here, what am I doing, what am I trying to get out of life? It's being more intentional. And the second is having a natural flow from those intentions into actions. And then each of those directions are broken down into sub-directions that really help people move through the polarities. And then the second polarity is fact versus story, which is basically separating out facts, that which is observable, that which we can count on, versus the theoretical interpretation of the facts, which is the stories we make up. And so one, we can ground in the fact that, okay, this is something I see, this is something I know. Everything else I'm making up about that. And it's funny because I was just talking to a client on a call yesterday where I said, you need to make up a better story. And he said, yeah, but you've been training me to not, to not rely on the stories, to rely on facts. And I said, ooh, somehow I missed something there because the stories that we make up are critical. They give meaning to our lives. So first we separate out the facts so we can take the stories more lightly. But in the end, it's where we create meaning. And what are the stories that we're living out that are creating the life that we have, whether it's happy or sad, or whether it's fulfilling, whether it's rich, whether it's successful. It's the stories that in the end help make up the life we have in the end.
Now, let's talk about when you bring up stories versus facts, and I'm certain that many of us in the workplace have experienced the story modality of a situation that's happened, because you can usually hear the emotion as they're describing, well, this is what's going on here. And most of the time in the workplace, too, you sense that the story turns them into victims as they're sharing it. So let's talk about the difference between facts and the story there so people can get a better idea about what we're talking about here.
Yeah, good. Yeah, you can start hearing the story in it. So the facts are what you and I can see. Like in this moment, because we're not in the same room, our facts are limited to what is said, what you've said, what I've said. And, if I start saying, well, Dave's a great guy, or hey, Dave's really deep, or Dave, I could say, hey, he's read the book. And I could say that would become closer to a fact because what I can say is he has made reference to the book. Maybe what I don't know is maybe somebody read it for him or did a summary, but he's definitely referred to Deck and Matilda. That's a fact that Dave made reference to Deck and Matilda on this call. So there I'm referring to specific things that were said or done that I've seen or witnessed as facts. And then I have to take more loosely all the other things I'm making up about, wow, he's really into this. He has depth. He's bringing the richness of the book out. So those are thoughts I'm having, but they're all stories. So to first separate out what is a fact, notice what are the stories I'm making up, and then deciding are those stories serving me or not in terms of where I'm intending to go. Gotcha.
Now, I would like to bring Deck into the situation. I think even though I related between the two, his was the most interesting because here was a gentleman in a situation that had a business going. He was paying his employees an average of about, I believe it was it 7% above industry standard, give or take?
Yeah, give or take, yeah.
And what he was having a problem with, though, is that people were actually not sticking around. They just would quit on an average of after about 13 months, I believe it was. So let's go ahead and talk about what he was dealing with here and how you began to help him with the clarity map, the clarity compass, to be able to take a look at his reality map, to take an honest approach at what is really going on here, because like many, hey, I'm a boss, I'm doing the right thing, I'm paying them to do what they're supposed to be doing here, so how come they all just keep exodusing this company here? I don't get it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so he's, like a lot of people, actually he was a person with a lot of talent. I'm called in either to work with CEOs who say, hey, I've gotten a lot of success, but I feel like I'm plateauing here. Or I'm called, the other probably 40% of the people I'm called into are CEOs saying, hey, I have somebody here that I'm working with that I want to keep because they bring so much, but there's this blind spot, there's a shadow side to them. And in this case, Deck was one of the owners, but he was still wanting to grow, and he had a significant blind spot where he was actually very abrasive. He was demanding, abrasive, caustic. And he just saw that, as so many people see their negative side. That's an asset. That's me. I'm assertive. I'm direct. I mean, they didn't even have it up on the walls. Being direct is a value we have here. So it was masking the shadow side of where it was impacting the business. So because he wasn't seeing his own challenges, it was left him to blame everybody else for what was going on.
So now, how did he come to the conclusions? Kind of give a little bit of a step-by-step process of how he went to use the Clarity Compass to arrive at some unique conclusions that really take quite a bit of courage for somebody to approach.
Yeah, actually, I appreciate you mentioning the courage, because a lot of this is our egos are invested in seeing the world as we've already established it. So to start letting go of things, one, is an affront to the ego's sense of being right. And two, a lot of the things that we see, it's like, okay, sometimes it's like, I'm not as attractive to myself as I would like to be. And that's what was the case with Deck, is that the first thing he started to do is look at his intentions, and then he started looking at the facts. And when he started looking at the facts, he had to confront it was an overwhelming number of people who are leaving. And it started to loosen them up. And it's like, okay, I can stick with this repetitive story in my head about it's them, but, when it's so many other people, then I have to begin to wonder if it's me. And this is how he started looking at his stories then, and just in terms of how he was making them wrong, and started to say, hey, are there other explanations for this? And with each of these was just a little twang of pain. But the second half of the Clarity Compass book is about other, stepping into the shoes of the other, understanding the other person's perspective. And it's really there where, the self part is about self-management, examining my own beliefs, but it's really there where Deck and many others start to wake up to other perspectives other than his own. And this was a stretch for him. And when he started to see how other people might see him based off of conversations he's had, things he said, it was challenging for him to see how caustic he had been and how much he cut people off, didn't give them a chance to speak. And through a series of those type of interventions on himself, basically, that he started to wake up to the fact that he was more responsible than he had previously imagined for how the situation was taking place.
Mm-hmm. See, and it reminded me of a fifth grade teacher who one time had said, he was a World War II veteran, says, whenever you point your finger out at the problem, you've got three fingers pointing back at you. And that was certainly something that Matilda came to learn in her self-discovery, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, in all of your fifth grade teachers, so spot on, because in all of our self-discovery, there is a place where we move from, you used the word earlier, victim, that we shift from victim into more self-responsibility, ultimately, which is empowering. It's painful. But and most people say, aren't I taking enough responsibility? I remember giving a talk one time, and a guy stood up and he said, I thought I was coming here to get some tricks and tools and stuff. What I'm hearing is you want me to take responsibility for my life.
Oh, yeah, geez, forbid me from doing that, right?
Exactly. Well, fortunately, he had a little lilt to it, and everybody laughed when he said it. But really, he was actually speaking the truth. He was making fun of himself. Because most of the time, it's like, I don't need more responsibility. I don't need more possibility. I just need the other people to do what I want them to do, to hear what I'm trying to tell them, and if they just listen to me, everything will work out. This self-responsibility it's a huge piece.
So now you outline 3 types of blind spots in your book, which is one of those things that the Clarity Compass can help us unravel or unveil as we're trying to, get a better perspective on how we can solve a problem, have better relationships, whether it's outside the workplace or it's inside the workplace, things like that. Let's talk about what those 3 types of blind spots are so people get a better understanding.
Yeah, I think the easiest way to look at the 3 blind spots is see a movement from I just don't have all the information, which is I'm making decisions that where the blind spot is I just don't have all the data. I thought I had all the data, but maybe I need to do a little bit more searching. So in that case, it's less of an internal journey, but more of an admitting maybe I don't know what I don't know. How can I go out and search for more and more information? That's one end of the continuum of the blind spot. The other end of the continuum is I've made up assumptions about the other person, either their intentions, their where they were, where they weren't, what was going on for them. I've made up my own understanding of reality. It just isn't reflecting reality. So at this other end of the continuum, and that's what the three pieces are trying to move people from is, okay, here's the data out there that I don't have, all the way to deeper and deeper levels. In the end saying, okay, actually I'm making up a reality that's not consistent with the physical reality out there. And how can I have a better match of what I'm thinking to what's happening out in the real world and what really is effective?
Now, people might be thinking to themselves, well, if what you're saying is reasonable, then what is it within me that's caused this situation in the first place? And that's where you begin talking about beliefs. Now, you're hearing a lot about this, especially in the last couple of years, thought science and neuroscience, things like that. And all of a sudden, you change your beliefs, you change your life. Yeah, that's a part of it, but it doesn't mean that you absolutely have to change everything. It just depends on whether or not it will be effective, and that's what you talk about. In fact, the key highlight here is you have to ask yourself the question, do I want to be right or do I want to be effective? And quite frankly, that was an easy question for me to answer. I want to be effective. I don't care if I'm right or not. Let's just be sure we're achieving this goal. And, many years or over the years, I've actually ran teams of people. And as I was mentioning earlier in the program, I've had the opportunity to study great leadership, apply it into action. I know one of my favorite books that I suggest to people is The 1 Minute Manager, just because of its simplicity and its clarity and that you can apply it. And it takes time, and a little bit of adjustment, but you realize, wow, this stuff really works. And you really have to be flexible if you're going to be effective, I think.
Yeah. That question is really a powerful question for people because most people will say, oh, of course I want to be more effective. Of course I want to be more effective. But then it's starting to wake up to where they're attached to being right that they weren't aware that they were attached to being right. It's again, coming back to the blind spots. It's like, okay, you say, Sally or Pete, you want to be more effective, but look over here. And it's challenging because I love my clients, and they're high-caliber people that really want to grow, and most of the things they're doing are awesome. So what we're really looking at is subcategories where they're more attached to being right than being effective. And most of the time, say, hey, did you notice that, you haven't been as good with people? It's like, oh, no, I got, and they can pull stuff out of their shelves. It's like, I got all this feedback that says I'm great interpersonally. And it's like, okay, yeah, you're great interpersonally, but see, in this one area is where you are being caustic, or one area where you're being shy even, or where you're not showing up, or you're not having the conversations that you could be having. And the last piece is a good piece, is that most of the time when I'm working with clients, we get to discover there's conversations. That's why I get into the creative conversations in the book, is there are conversations that they could be having that they're somehow avoiding or skirting around, even as they're having other powerful conversations.
Now, what I noticed, too, I love getting back to this Deck character because he reminds me of the typical American, and maybe it could be worldly workplace, but I'm going to just stick with America for right now, is that you go in as an employee, you go to work, there's a boss or a business owner, and not in a lot of cases, but in often cases, you can almost smell a lack of, you really haven't developed a leadership style at all. You think because you've opened the doors and you're paying me, that somehow you know everything there is to know, and I'm just the idiot that you're paying to make sure that I complete the job that you're paying me to do. Not only that, but they also communicate to their employees in a way, not only as if they're stupid, but as if they're entitled to talk to them the way that they do sometimes, and you sometimes just scratch your head, get disgusted, like, where is this coming from? And it was interesting how Deck took a look at, for instance, his family and his pets and realized how well he treats them, but yet he can't feed these people if he doesn't have motivated, enthusiastic employees to keep those doors of his business open. And I've watched businesses limp along, and in fact, there was one business some time ago, it was a restaurateur, and she had actually made the claim. She says, well, we're successful restaurateurs, that manager we have isn't. And I'm thinking, okay, so you've been in business 42 years, I think it was. And I said, let me tell you what I know of when it comes to successful entrepreneurs or restaurateurs, Bill McCormick and Doug Schmick were two people that got together actually 3 years after these guys opened their doors, and they built a total of 80 stores by 2010. You've got one store here for 42 years. You're just limping along. You can't even keep good people here because they just don't want to deal with the nonsense that you guys come up with, because you've got these ingrained set beliefs. This is the way it needs to be done. And what I found fascinating about this was the fact that in this bigger company where they had up to 80 stores, there was a tremendous consistency of how people worked together. There was a tremendous consistency in how, let's say, Bill and Doug and the management and you name it would be around, and they would actually be talking with people who worked in the company, whether it was the food server, the dishwasher, or the cooks in the back. There was that you could go to any one of these stores and feel like, geez, it feels like I've been working with these people forever, and nobody ever leaves. And you don't see a difference between these two. What did these two pull off that this other place didn't? And you could see clear, you could feel the energy. It was like an energy of participation that when you signed on as an employee, according to a friend of mine, you felt like you were there being supported and not being told what to do. And it was just such a different culture. It was amazing.
Yeah, in that situation, what were the different conversations that you could hear people having in the contrast of the one of the business versus the other?
Well, the biggest thing is that people were looking at possibilities, I think it was. Whereas it seemed the other one was always talking about problems. And it brings me to a point in your book where you're talking about data and status, and this is one of those areas where you really get some clarity about, well, geez, how much am I really responsible for what's going on here? And in Deck's case, as he began to do a data and status list as part of this Clarity Compass, I'll just bullet point one of these. I've used a term or a phrase that expressed disappointment, and this is, I believe, in emails, at an employee via email 140 times in the last year. Me personally, I can already see what the problem is.
It's right there in that one sentence, right.
And yet he had like 4 or 5 more of those. But he had data to support the fact, oh boy, maybe I should take a look at what I'm doing, rather than, looking out, side of myself and saying, what can I get them to do better since I'm paying them, sort of a thing. Back to that. I'm the boss, I'm paying you, I'm entitled to talk to and treat you any way I want to, but I can't figure out why my business isn't working.
Exactly. Yeah, I think, like most of us, there'll be a conversation we have, and we'll think, I should have said this, and then I'll be laying in bed at night, saying that same sentence over and over again. And it's just an example of where we're on a treadmill. And so in Deck's example, he was just on the treadmill of, the employees are ungrateful, the employees, I pay them well, and he was just on that treadmill on over and over. And the Clarity Compass invites you off of the treadmill looking at these different aspects. So, Daniel, I appreciate you, pointing out that one example of where, he had a list of pieces of data that he had collected that, in the end, it got him off of the treadmill of my employees are ungrateful, and really had him sit with some facts like, oh, wow. That's a significant number, given the emails I send to my employees, and the ones that were complimentary were low. It's like, that ratio is really out of whack. How do I rationalize that? And after a while, it's like, how much can I rationalize each and every one of these things I'm looking at without starting to wake up that maybe I'm not seeing life in the way that's effective?
Now, how can a person know when they're running into a blind spot?
That is a great question, because it's I see us all, myself included, as primarily automaton. we're trying to be awake, but we're basically, I show up as Brit wherever I go. And so how can I, reinvent myself to the new possibilities? You were talking about possibility orientation. So there's something about how do I wake up, and if there's a repetitive pattern with an individual or a situation or a career, there's a good chance that there's somewhere I'm stuck, somewhere there's a blind spot. It's a case where if there's a feeling that I have or emotion that I'm stuck in, or a situation I'm stuck in that seems like, oh, this is familiar. I start seeing the parallels across relationships, work relationships, personal relationships, kids. Once I start seeing those patterns, then I can say, oh, there's something here I'm likely not seeing that if I saw it differently, I could shift this dynamic.
Absolutely. I remember a time there was a woman that I knew who was really interested in crossing over from the position she was in into a different position in the company. And each time she would talk about this, she seemed to be saying, well, this guy isn't letting me do this, or I see this. And she was pointing out all the problems that this manager apparently was getting in the way. And I said, well, first of all, you've discussed this is your intention, your desire, this is where you want to go. And I said, have you actually sat down with this person and said, okay, what do I need to get from here to there? And make that person proactive in your success rather than making them the enemy that's keeping you from that. And that's exactly what we talk about here today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, I mentioned the subdirections of the actions section, and right there you just brought up all three. One is crucial people, who are the people I need to be talking to. Another one is making a request, is how can I make a request? And the third is how can I have a creative conversation? And in that one quick example you gave, there's an example where it's like, one, I'm seeing this person's crucial, I need to go to him or her, and two, I make the request about information I'm needing, and three, I really engage in a conversation with them about what's possible, rather than a crucial or conflictual conversation. Actually, I'm having a creative conversation that generates possibilities and new ways of seeing the situation, not only for myself, but for the other person.
Now, one thing you definitely hit on is, and sometimes there seems to be a lack of it with linear thinking, but why should we embrace imagination, especially in the area of the business world and the workplace?
Yeah, most people equate imagination with fantasy, but I would contend that imagination is the greatest faculty that we have. In fact, I think it was Einstein who said, imagination is more important than knowledge. And so there's something there where the creative spark within us is so vital. And so it provides an opportunity for us to see life in a new way. So even in the example you just gave, if I'm stuck in just making the other person wrong, it requires just even a tad of imagination to say, oh, I could actually go and have a conversation with that person that I've never had before. I mean, that was the suggestion that you made to it. So there it came from you. So where you're using your imagination applied to the situation. What I'm really inviting is for all of us to, as best we can, have imagination so we can see our situations in new ways rather than the old stale ways that we've been stuck in.
Now, finally, what I'd like to leave our listeners with something to chew on, too, is you talk about two things when it comes to wants. One is situational wants, and then the next is deeper wants. First, describe what each one of those are and what the differences are.
This is what I was talking about earlier when I say that the book is ultimately surreptitiously and subversively inviting us to greater depth. I've worked with a lot of people who are former engineers or lawyers or scientists, and so the Clarity Compass appeals to them because it's an analytical tool. But then part of that intentions, as you said, is the deeper wants. And so here we're starting to say, okay, the situational want, what are you wanting out of this situation? And then separating that out from what are you wanting for you? And it's really challenging because I say, okay, what are you wanting for you personally? And they'll say, oh, well, I want them to get this job done, or I'm wanting them to be nicer to me, or I'm wanting them to say, no, what are you wanting for you? And that's where a lot of people struggle, is that in each situation there is some internal motivation that is driving me to to act in this situation. As, for example, I may want security, I want recognition, I want appreciation, I want safety, I want to relax, I want to feel like I can let down a little bit, I want to have fun, I want to be creative. But those are all the deeper wants within me, and if I can get in touch with those, then they don't drive me as much, but I can consciously create actions that meet those deeper wants rather than not admit the deeper want and somehow inadvertently get that need met. But you'd be surprised that as people begin to look at themselves, how much they see some deeper wants for safety or security or to reduce fear are impacting how they're showing up in their situations that they previously weren't even aware of at any conscious level.
Now, going back to our little buddy Deck, we're going to go ahead and give some enlightenment here on what we're talking about here. So here he is. He's got a situational want where he says, I want people to produce services and profits for me. Now, his deeper one, he says, I want prosperity, I want ease, I want to feel respected, I want to be obeyed. And that one really leapt out at me, obeyed, really? So then you read the next paragraph, and this is really important because this is so true. I see this happen quite a bit. He had military experience that showed him that a man in control is the man who sees his will carried out. Now, in the military, that has to happen because it's either that or you're facing the man. That's just all there is to it. However, in the civilian world, it's a different story. We're all showing up in the civilian world as volunteers that you're paying for us to do a job, and we can just as easily walk away from it. And certainly Deck's had a lot of experience with that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think it's at that point that, to me, Deck turns heroic. Meaning, in a sense, there's a villain role he plays, and in terms of he's creating misery for many, many lives. But when he confesses, in essence, that he wants to be obeyed, once he's willing to be transparent about that, first of all with himself, and then to actually write it down, that's where transformation resides. Because it's like, holy cow, and like you said, it stands out. As you look at it, it's like, holy cow, I'm wanting people to obey me. And even with there, he could get in touch with the part that's like, that's right, I want people to obey me. But then there was another part of it that was like, ooh, that's a little severe. And it was really at that kind of point that he began to wake up to, okay, maybe something's going on here in me that I wasn't aware of until that moment, that is actually overly demanding, overly controlling, that as he woke up to it painfully, that began to help him shift. And that's what I say, there he becomes heroic, because he's looking at himself in ways that are painful, but can transform his life.
But what's interesting, too, about that, we all have heard, for instance, in physics, that our inner worlds actually create the outer experiences we have. Mm-hmm. And when you talk about, for instance, earlier in the program, about taking responsibility for that activity going on, I keep remembering a Dr. Hugh Lim that I interviewed some years ago. He was the one who was known to introduce the Hawaiian Ho'oponopono to the West. And, it was really fascinating to take a look at that because he says, well, let's just take a look at just the obvious. People can argue, well, how could a maddening criminal, such as the place that he actually worked where people were beginning to become healed, turning things around and actually being released. These were people that thought there was no hope for it all, and he comes in and they're like, what are you doing here? And, his phrases were simple. They were, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, and I love you. Because he felt that he was just as responsible for their condition as they were for why they were there in the first place. And he says, here's the easiest way to look at it, and see if you can argue with me on this, he says. He says, do you ever notice that when you have a problem that you're right there? And I thought, that's quite a bit of genius right there.
Exactly. Yeah.
So there must be something in you that's attracting this experience to you. The question is now, are you willing to discover what that is if you don't want it anymore?
Exactly. Yeah, to me, that you're really, I'm loving your nugget, Daniel, because you're capturing the essence of what we're trying to do. Because it's one thing to say, okay, no, I take responsibility and I don't want it anymore, but then to say, okay, what do I do next? And that's really why I created the Clarity Compass is, okay, if I'm willing to start looking at myself and looking closely at these situations and the patterns and where I am always there, in these problems, it's a step-by-step approach to kind of lead people into seeing where they are creating these patterns. So it's not just I am creating them, and now it's like, okay, I see how I'm creating them. And like that obey piece that you pointed out, it's like, oh, once I write that down, I've got a key to unlock some stuckness.
And there it is. That's the key. You open up the possibilities. What you were also talking about is people feel this greater sense of hope. And when you have those two things going on, there's not too much that you can't do, is there?
I always like to say I can't promise you're going to get everything you want, but if you follow this path, if you take the responsibility, it increases the likelihood significantly that you're going to get what you want.
Now, as you've been doing this over the years, what kind of feedback have you actually been getting from your book as it's been out there?
Well, I've been doing the work for, as you said, almost 40 years I've been doing this kind of work. And with the Clarity Compass in its current form, I've called it the Leadership Map before. I've been doing about 16 years. And I go back to corporations, and I'll walk down the hall, and I'll say, oh, Britt, I don't know if you remember me, but I went through the Clarity Compass 10 years ago. And some people say, I use it every day. Some people say, I use it consciously every day. I've got a little map of it up on the wall. And some people say, I don't think about it every day, but I've developed the habits of thinking in the way that the Clarity Compass presents, and now I just automatically think in that orientation, and it makes all the difference in the world. So I've been thrilled with the feedback that I've gotten people who've used the Clarity Compass.
Well, again, it's very exciting. As I said in the book, I've talked with a lot of people over the years. I've read a lot of books over the years, and there's a lot of great work out there, and they all have value. But I love the simplicity of, again, your book, and that you use two characters that were going through their experiences so you can show, well, this is how this works and why it's important and how you go about applying it yourself. And as you said, any new exercise is going to take a little bit of work, a little bit of muscle building, that sort of thing, because change doesn't come that quick or easy. And one thing I've actually shared over the air when sometimes people say, well, how come is it that when I go and I set a New Year's Eve resolution, and a month later, maybe 2 months later at best, I've tried my best, well, at least I believe I have anyway. That's usually what it is. I believe I have.
Yeah.
And they don't get to where they want to go. And I said, the mind is an interesting character. And I had a psychologist on the program a couple of years back, and her book was a lot of fun because she talked about the different areas of the brain and what their functions were. So you clearly knew, well, this is what the hippocampus does, the prefrontal cortex, so forth and so on. And what she was describing in her book, the reason that change can be a challenge for everybody is how the brain works. She says, you got to imagine the brain's responsibility, first and foremost, is to be sure that all the automatic systems of the body are working. That's a lot of energy and a lot of work.
Yeah.
So it tries to find the most efficient way that it can achieve this while allowing you that space to be able to grow and learn. Now, that's even more responsibility. So what it does is it creates these patterns of efficiency, and that's what we as human beings tend to call habits. Mm-hmm. So to change that habit, what you're saying to the brain is, I want to put some extra time and energy into your process so I can move this different direction. And the brain's saying to you, well, okay, well, that's great, and I can see that you want that, but look, I've already created an efficient system for the life that you have now. Why don't you lay off and let's just keep things going the way they were? And I think anybody that hears what I've just said realizes, oh, that's why I'm not getting up in the morning to go jogging to lose that weight like I promised myself I would be. The brain's kind of letting me know, isn't it kind of nice just laying here in bed? We can go ahead and we can do it again tomorrow. We can pick up where you left off, even double it. And it's funny because you realize all of us, I think, have those conversations until we become aware, oh, that's what we need to do is say, okay, brain, just bear with me and let's just take this one step at a time and let's create a new efficiency and a different way of going. And the brain wants to do that, but just not right off the bat. And I thought, geez, now that I understand that, maybe goal achievement isn't as challenging as I used to think it was.
Yeah, I'm loving how you're talking about it, Daniel, because and you're using other words for what I'm talking about with the reality map, in that it's not efficient for the brain to create a perfect reality map. It's just a reality map that maps out every little nuance, everything accurately, because it's more than what the brain can manage. So it's trying to be efficient in its representation of reality, so it takes shortcuts. And then it creates a homeostasis around that, a stuckness that is similar to what you're talking about, habits. So you're talking about changing habits and behaviors, and underneath that, what I'm hearing you talk about is changing the habit of thought and changing the reality maps that help create either success or failure.
Very exciting work. First of all, I want to let you know it's been a pleasure to have you on the program. We could definitely revisit this again. I'd be certainly welcome to doing that. But
I would love it too, Daniel. Yeah.
Yeah, we're both having a lot of fun with this. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Now, there's a website that people can go to find out more about your work. And if anything, for our listeners out there, let's have some fun with this. I see on your blog here, will Hillary and Trump be present at your Thanksgiving dinner? Now, I haven't read that yet, but I wanted to throw that out there because certainly that's one of those areas we have our opinions about politics, and certainly in Portland, Oregon, we've seen that we've had more protests against Trump than I think any other president in the history of presidential elections here in the city. But you know, it's interesting, you know, that you had that there on your site. So I thought that I'd throw that in there, plus the Dr. Seuss, the places you'll go, kind of thing. But go ahead and tell us where your website is and things like that.
Yeah, so claritycompass.com. Yeah, Clarity Compass or claritycompassbook.com. It's actually clarity-compass.com or claritycompassbook.com is probably the easiest to remember. claritycompassbook.com. And that'll give you access to the book page, and then there's also the blog page that you just mentioned, Daniel. Or, you know, some folks may just want to just go right to Amazon because you can get a Kindle edition or a paperback edition as well.
Well, very good. Well, Dr. Paulson, thank you for joining us here on the program today. Is there any parting thoughts you'd like to leave with our listeners today?
I think that, especially because this is a Beyond 50 show, I think there's the piece that I want to emphasize on your show more than any other, because I'm Beyond 50 myself, is that really, as much as I hope you take the book as a way to solve career and relationship challenges, I'm hoping that your listeners in particular really take advantage of the book to come more into heart and depth of their own being, that there's a richness of being alive that's available through the work that I'm hoping that your listeners in particular really take advantage of, because I think there's something there for them.
Well, I'm certain they will. Again, Dr. Brett Paulson, thank you for joining us here on the program today to introduce the Clarity Compass. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, me too. Thank you, Daniel.
You bet.
Right.
I want to thank you, the listeners out there, for joining us. Again, take action and pick up a copy of the Clarity Compass. I think you'll find it very revealing about why perhaps you're finding plateaus in your life and how you can move past those. You can also discover more by taking your Clarity Compass and directing yourself to our website, which is beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We encourage you to sign up for our weekly e-newsletter and stay up to date with what's going on in the world of Beyond 50, including upcoming programs. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.